Sometimes life hides its twists and turns in the most unlikely places, and when you least expect it, a simple stroll through a square can become the turning point of your entire existence. That is exactly what happened to Daniel, a middle-aged businessman known in Los Angeles for his coldness in business and discretion in his personal life. On that cloudy October afternoon, he had no idea that around a corner he would face his past in a way he could never have foreseen, and even less, that his ex-wife would be there, sleeping on a bench with 3 children who looked just like him. But wait, how is it that a woman who always rejected the idea of being a mother now had 3 children? And the most unsettling part, why did those children seem to carry so many of Daniel's features, even though he had never had any children? The answer to the first question is simple. Life doesn't always follow the plan we lay out, and Claire, or rather Sophia, was forced to face the harshest side of motherhood alone. As for the second, well, that is the part that hurts the most. Daniel didn't know it, but those children were indeed his, and that revelation would come with a devastating impact in the hours that followed. At the time, Daniel was at the peak of his career. He had just expanded his chain of gourmet cafes to the East Coast and was about to close a deal with a multinational corporation. His world was made up of spreadsheets, meetings, and goals. Feelings, he avoided them. Family, a concept he had tried to build in the past, but which, according to him, didn't fit his lifestyle. When he separated from Sophia 7 years ago, he did so convinced that they were both following different paths, and that it was better that way. She wanted more time, more presence, maybe children. He wanted more freedom. And so it was. Without any apparent hard feelings, each went his own way. Yet on that park bench, everything Daniel believed he had left behind confronted him again. Sophia was sleeping, holding 3 skinny blonde little boys in her arms, dressed in worn-out clothes, but with eyes so bright, just as bright as his own. He stood frozen. His heart raced. Every cell in his body seemed to scream at him to run away. But he couldn't. It was as if time had stopped. Everything in him wanted to deny that scene, to pretend it was just a coincidence. But something stronger, something he couldn't explain, made him stay. And that was when the most important day of Daniel's life began, the day that would change everything. Daniel hesitated for a few minutes. He watched from a distance, as if he were watching a strange movie in which he was both spectator and character. He thought about leaving. He thought about pretending that none of that had anything to do with him, but something inside his chest stopped him. It was then that he saw one of the children wake up and look around, half asleep, as if already accustomed to the situation. The boy, who looked about 4 years old, tugged at his mother's coat and nestled closer to her. Daniel felt a lump in his throat, and for the first time in many years, he felt fear. Not the fear of failing at a business or losing money, but the real fear of having made a mistake that could no longer be fixed. He approached slowly, not knowing what to say. When he got close enough, he saw Sophia wake up, startled, as if under attack. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. The expression of surprise and pain on her face was like a silent stab. She covered her mouth with her hand, and for a second, the silence between them spoke more than any word. "Daniel?" she whispered, hardly believing it. He only nodded with a subdued gesture, as if he didn't have the strength to face it all. No matter how many questions raced through his mind, none seemed adequate. Everything there was fragile, delicate, as if any wrong word could further shatter what was already in ruins. Sophia tried to compose herself, but she was visibly exhausted. Her sunken eyes, her tattered clothes, and the way she shielded her children said it all. There was no need to ask if she was all right. Daniel, who had always prided himself on being practical and direct, did not know where to begin. "Are these your children?" he ventured. Sophia took a deep breath. She looked at the three little boys and then met Daniel's gaze with an expression mixing pain and relief. "Ours," she replied, her voice choked. That word fell on Daniel like a crushing weight. He staggered slightly, as if struck by a truth known to everyone but him. From that moment on, time seemed to slow down. Daniel sat beside her, not knowing what to say. The distant sound of cars, the cold wind slicing through the afternoon, the dry leaves being swept along the ground, everything seemed to conspire to give that scene a surreal air. Sophia explained, with pauses and hesitations, that she had discovered the pregnancy weeks after the separation. She had tried to find him, but he had already changed his number, his email, everything. "You disappeared from my life as if I had never existed," she said. Without support, without family nearby, she had to face everything on her own. All three were born premature, spent months in the hospital, and since then she'd been fighting day after day to survive with them. Daniel listened in silence, feeling a confusing mix of shame, disbelief, and guilt. As much as he wanted to question why she hadn't insisted on finding him, he knew the truth was simple. He had completely withdrawn, leaving no trace behind. At the time, that seemed necessary, a clean restart, far from any emotional ties. But now, all of that seemed like selfishness disguised as practicality. When she revealed that she had lost her job months ago and couldn't pay the rent, he felt a tightness in his chest. They were living in shelters, surviving on donated food, and sometimes even sleeping on the streets, just like that night. Sophia didn't cry. She spoke with a resigned calm, as if having been through so much that she no longer had the strength to feel emotional. The silence between them was dense. Daniel watched the children, who were now awake and playing with twigs near the bench. They were identical, yet each had a different expression. One was more curious, another more serious, and the third couldn't seem to sit still. Despite the situation, there was something brilliant about them, in their eyes, in the way they moved. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a true desire to care, to protect. The weight of all those years of absence fell on him with full force. The realization was still sinking in, but it was too late to turn back time. All that remained was to decide what he would do from that moment on. Sophia asked for nothing. She didn't ask for help, money, or explanations. She simply said she needed to keep the children safe and that she would do anything for that. "I'm not asking you to take responsibility, Daniel. I just wanted you to know that they exist, that you are their father," she said firmly, but with eyes filled with exhaustion. Daniel felt another lump in his throat. There stood an exhausted yet incredibly strong woman who had given up everything, even her pride, to protect her children. There was no more time for hesitation. This wasn't a problem to be solved with a check. It was an entire life he had ignored, and that now suddenly was knocking on his door. He looked at the children once more, and on an impulse he couldn't even explain at that moment, he took off his coat and wrapped it around Sophia and the children. "Let's get out of here, now." Sophia hesitated, surprised by the decisive tone, but allowed herself to be led. They grabbed the little they had, a worn-out backpack, some old blankets and broken toys, and followed him. The walk to the car was silent, but laden with meaning. Daniel didn't know exactly what he would do next, but in that instant, something inside him had changed. He was no longer the man who controlled everything from afar. He was someone who, after so much time, was about to truly face life. Before continuing the story, subscribe to our channel and comment from which city you're watching. We want to know just how far our stories reach. On the way to his apartment, Daniel found himself looking in the rearview mirror several times. The boys were in the back seat, dozing off, nestled against each other. Sophia, beside him, kept her eyes fixed on The window, saying nothing. It was surreal. He, who never imagined being a father, was now driving with 3 children asleep in the car. And more than that, he was bringing back the woman he once loved and whom he had pushed away to his home. His mind was racing. There were so many things to ask, to understand, but at the same time, he knew it wasn't the moment. They needed a warm bath, food, and safety. The rest could wait until the next day. Arriving at the penthouse, Sophia entered, cautiously, as if she were intruding in a place where she wasn't entirely welcome. The children, though tired, were fascinated by the view from above. The modern furniture, the huge television. It was a world entirely different from the one they knew. Daniel noticed the contrast with a growing discomfort in his chest. How could he be living in such comfort while his children slept on the sidewalks? He let them take a bath, prepared a simple, hot meal, something he hadn't done in years, and placed blankets on the sofa for them to sleep on. That night, for the first time in a long time, his home was filled with life, the sound of children's laughter and the aroma of real food. And that moved him more than any business meeting ever could. While watching the children doze on the living room sofa, Daniel pulled up a chair near the kitchen and sat down next to Sophia. They sat in silence for a few minutes until he finally asked, "Have you hated me all this time?" She took a deep breath before replying, "No, I was angry, I felt alone, scared, but I never hated you. I just needed you to be there, even if it was only to tell me I wasn't crazy trying to raise 3 children on my own." Her answer hit him like a punch in the stomach. He lowered his head, ashamed. "I failed you. And them too," he said. It was the first time he admitted something like that out loud. Sophia didn't respond immediately. She picked up a cup of tea, took a sip, and then said, "Maybe, but you're here now. And that is more than I ever imagined." Daniel looked at her with a mixture of admiration and guilt. That woman, whom he had once thought to be fragile, had faced the world with a strength he never possessed. They talked late into the night, discussing the lost years, the hardships she endured, the difficult moments and the small victories. He listened intently, as if trying to recover every stolen second. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt he was where he was meant to be, and he began to understand that perhaps his life up until that point had been built on the wrong priorities. The next morning, Daniel woke up before everyone else. The sun softly filtered through the curtains, illuminating the makeshift toys scattered around the living room. He spent some time just watching. The 3 boys still slept together on the sofa, and Sophia lay curled up on a blanket on the rug, her face serene. That scene stirred something in him he couldn't explain. It was as if he was seeing for the first time what truly mattered. And it was there in silence, in front of those 4 people who now formed part of his life, that Daniel made a decision. It was no longer about helping out of obligation or guilt. He wanted to be present. He wanted to take responsibility. He wanted to make amends, even knowing that he could never erase the past. After breakfast, he called Sophia for a talk. They sat on the balcony, with the children playing on the living room floor. Daniel looked into her eyes and said, "I don't know how to do this. I've never been a father. I don't know what is right or wrong in this role, but I want to learn, and I want to be by your side." Sophia fell silent for a few seconds. Then, with teary eyes, she said simply, "They don't need perfection, Daniel. They just need someone who stays." That struck him deeply. It wasn't about knowing everything or offering luxury. It was about presence, about love, about building something from what little was left. In the days that followed, Daniel began to reorganize his routine. He cancelled trips, delegated tasks, and took a vacation for the first time in years. He started taking the boys to the park, gathered information about nearby public schools, and even bought books on fatherhood. Everything was new to him, from preparing a lunchbox to dealing with tantrums and midnight tears. But curiously, he didn't feel like he was wasting time. On the contrary, he began to realize that this was truly living. The pressure of business still existed, but it no longer dominated him as it once did. His focus had shifted, and for the first time, he felt he was growing as a human being. Sophia, little by little, also adapted. She began sleeping better, regained her self-esteem, and started looking for work with renewed confidence. Seeing Daniel involved with the children, changing diapers, telling stories, laughing at their silly jokes, made her believe once again that things could work out. There were still wounds, scars, that don't heal overnight. But there was also a new, timid hope budding between them, something not based on the past, but on a sincere willingness to rebuild. And that, in itself, was a huge step. What impressed Daniel most in all of this was not just how much his children needed him, but how much he needed them too. Over the weeks, he realized that the days went by faster when he was with them, despite all the chaos and exhaustion. A simple drawing made with crayons became a source of pride. Midday hug, a "Daddy, look at this," exclaimed with excitement, melted away any barriers he still held. It was as if each small gesture from his children erased a bit of the rigidity he had built over the years. And amid it all, Daniel began to understand that truly loving required vulnerability, and he was finally willing to allow himself that. Yet, the nights were the most difficult moments, not because of the children, but because of the conversations that he and Sophia began to have. Over time. The two started looking at each other differently again, not as a couple yet, but as two survivors who had weathered the same storm from opposite sides. Sophia shared memorable episodes, the premature birth, the days when she had to choose between paying for a taxi or buying milk, the nights she slept hugging her children at metro stations. Daniel listened in silence, absorbing every word with pain and admiration. And he often wondered how he had let someone so strong slip away from his life. How could he have not recognized who she truly was? With each revelation, the guilt ate away at him a little more, but at the same time, something inside him was rebuilding. Daniel understood that trying to change the past was futile. The only thing he could do was to become a better man in the present. And that meant listening more, judging less, and being present even when the day was hard. In time, the children started calling him Daddy naturally. The first time he heard it coming, from the quietest of the three, he froze. He almost couldn't respond. He had to leave the room for a few minutes, take a deep breath, hide his emotion. He wasn't prepared for that kind of love, but he wanted to be more than anything. One Saturday afternoon, 2 months after that encounter in the square, Sophia received a call from a local publisher. She had sent, without much expectation, some short stories she had written over the past few years. Stories inspired by the hard moments she had lived. And now, someone wanted to publish them. Daniel was the first to celebrate, with an enthusiasm that surprised her. He organized a simple dinner at home, with the children making drawings to hang on the wall as special decorations. That night was symbolic. For the first time, everyone sat at the table as a family. Not a perfect family, but a real family, made of imperfections, mistakes, reconciliation, and new beginnings. Even with the progress, not everything was easy. The children's adjustment to the new life required patience. They were afraid of the dark, loud noises and brief separations. Crying for seemingly small reasons was frequent. Daniel, who once believed that everything was solved with logic and discipline, had to learn about empathy and emotional presence. He discovered that sometimes a child just needs you to sit on the floor next to them, hold their hand and say, "I'm here." He, who had spent his life being pressured to be strong and efficient, was now discovering the beauty of fragility. It was difficult, exhausting, but also profoundly human, and gradually he became more of a father than a businessman. The relationship with Sophia also went through delicate phases. There were resentments that insisted on reappearing at the most unexpected moments. A sharply spoken word, a prolonged silence, and old ghosts would knock on the door. But unlike in the past, this time they learned to talk, without yelling, without running away. They learned to apologize, to acknowledge their limits. Sophia at times still feared depending on him, and Daniel at times still blamed himself for having arrived too late. But both understood that they were rebuilding not only a relationship, but themselves. And that took time, but they were willing. And that was already a victory. One day, while taking the boys to get a haircut, Daniel happened to run into an old colleague from the corporate world. One of those guys who had always admired him for being cold and calculating. The man was visibly surprised to see Daniel surrounded by 3 children, one in his arms, another holding his hand, and the third asking if he could buy a candy. "You, a father?" he asked, laughing with a hint of mockery. Daniel simply smiled and replied, "Yes, I turned into a real person." The response came out unfiltered, but he realized it was exactly what he felt. He, who for years believed that being successful meant emotional distance, now understood that real success was something else entirely. Later that same night, sitting on the sofa with the children asleep on him, Daniel reflected on everything he had experienced in the past few months. He thought about how chance, or perhaps something greater, had placed him in that square exactly on the day he needed to be there the most. If he had passed by 10 minutes earlier or later, perhaps he would never have seen Sophia. Perhaps she would have left the next day with the children, disappearing forever. Shupt, he thought hurt, but it served to reaffirm how much that encounter had changed everything. It wasn't about luck, it was about opportunity. A second chance he had almost lost, and that he would now do everything to honor. The following months solidified what once seemed unthinkable. Daniel became a constant presence at the children's school, attended parent meetings, picked them up and dropped them off when he could, and even became known among the staff as the father of the triplets. It was something he never would have imagined years ago. He, who barely remembered his nieces' and nephews' birthdays, was now making cupcakes with his children to take to school. The transformation wasn't quick or easy, but it was real. And those who knew him before barely recognized the new Daniel. Even his demeanor had changed. He was lighter, more open, more human. And it wasn't because he had changed for someone else. It was because he had finally found himself. Sophia continued firmly with her career as a writer. Her first book was released with the support of an independent publisher and, to her surprise, became a hit on social media. It was a collection of true stories, written with sensitivity and pain, but also with a lot of truth. Daniel supported her in every way, taking care of the children at events, helping with the launches, and most importantly, being present. There was no longer any ego competition between them. They were partners, even though they still hadn't defined exactly what they were as a couple. Trust was being rebuilt little by little, not with promises, but with actions, and that was far more solid than any word spoken in the heat of the moment. On a cold winter night, while sharing a hot chocolate on the balcony, Sophia said something Daniel would never forget. "You didn't save us, Daniel. You saved yourself with us." That phrase disarmed him, because it was true. He, who once lived tied to goals, titles, and status, now understood what truly mattered. And that couldn't be measured in a resume or a bank balance. It was measured in the small hands that hugged him when he came back from the market. In the drawings stuck to the refrigerator with "I love you, Daddy," written in crooked letters. In Sophia's laughter when the children spilled juice on the table, in the life that finally made sense. Daniel's transformation wasn't only internal. He decided to use his experience to help others. He created a social project aimed at single mothers living on the streets, offering legal assistance, psychological support, and professional guidance. It was his way of giving back, of turning pain into action, and above all, of ensuring that other Sophias wouldn't have to sleep on park benches with their children in their arms. The project grew rapidly, fueled by partnerships he easily secured, but now used for a different purpose. And with every woman who found a home, a job, a new chance, Daniel felt that he was slowly healing the wound he carried inside. 1 year after that day in the square, Daniel organized a small celebration at home. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple dinner with close friends, Sophia, the children, and some mothers who had been helped by the project. It was a celebration of life, second chances, and a love that endures time and mistakes. That night, while the children ran around the room with raucous laughter, Sophia came over and took his hand. No words were needed. Their eyes said it all. Regret, gratitude, forgiveness, and love. Not the same love of the past, full of expectations and fears, but a new, mature love, born of pain and the daily choice to stay. Daniel knew he still had much to learn. Being a father was a journey without a manual, and rebuilding the trust of someone who had suffered so much required more than good intentions. But now, he wasn't running away anymore. He faced the challenges with the certainty that he wasn't alone. Sophia was his partner, the children his. Strengthen the past? Well, the past was a scar, not to be erased but to be remembered, as a constant reminder of where he came from and what he almost lost. And every time he looked at his family, he felt that despite everything, it was still possible to start over. Because life doesn't demand perfection, it only asks for presence. And if someone asks today who Daniel is, the answer goes far beyond a successful businessman. Daniel is a man who once lost himself and found in the most unexpected place the true meaning of living, a dedicated father, an evolving partner, and a human being in constant evolution. His story is not about a hero who saves the day, but about an ordinary man who chose not to repeat the same mistakes. And that is why his story inspires us. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest form of overcoming is having the courage to return, to ask for forgiveness, and to stay. Phrase of the day: sometimes life gives us a new chance, but it comes disguised as a challenge. The secret is not to run away when the heart calls us back. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, activate the notification bell, and comment below which city you're watching from. Your participation is very important for us to keep bringing real stories that inspire, move, and make us reflect on what truly matters in life.